The blood on Katherine Parker's hands had long since washed away, but the memory of that night 3 years ago still made her fingers tremble whenever a man raised his voice in her direction. She stood behind the counter of Murphy's General Store in Bisbee, Arizona, arranging cans of peaches with the kind of precision that came from needing something, anything, to keep her hands busy. It was August 1882, and the desert heat pressed against the storefront windows like an unwelcome visitor, but Katherine preferred the sweltering warmth to the cold she had known in her marriage. She had been 17 when she married Thomas Parker, and 19 when she buried him. The good people of Bisbee thought her a tragic young widow, a woman who had lost her husband to consumption. They did not know that she had spent 2 years flinching at every kind word he spoke, learning that his sweetest compliments were merely the calm before violence, that his gentlest tone often preceded his cruelest acts. Thomas had taught her that words were weapons wrapped in silk, that a man who called you beautiful in the morning might break your arm by evening for burning his supper. The bell above the door chimed, and Katherine's shoulders tensed automatically before she forced them down. Mr. Murphy had been good to her, giving her this job when she had nothing but the clothes on her back and a cabin on the edge of town that Thomas had won in a poker game. The old man knew something of her past, though not all of it, and he never pressed her with questions she could not answer. "Afternoon, Mrs. Parker," came a voice she did not recognize, low and careful, as though the speaker was aware that sound itself could startle. Katherine turned to see a man standing just inside the doorway, hat in his hands. He was tall, lean in the way men who worked with cattle and horses often were, with sun-darkened skin and eyes the color of creek water after rain. Something about the way he held himself, still and patient, reminded her of the wild mustangs that sometimes appeared on the ridge above town, ready to bolt at the first sign of danger. "Can I help you?" Katherine asked, keeping her voice level and her hands on the counter between them. He nodded once, a simple dip of his chin. "Need supplies, ranch supplies mostly. Mr. Murphy said you would know what I needed. You are new to the area." She reached for the ledger, grateful for the familiar task. "Kenneth Ortiz. Bought the old Hartman place north of town. Been working on it for about a month now." He stepped closer to the counter but stopped a respectful distance away. "Murphy says you keep good records." Katherine wrote his name at the top of a fresh page, noting the steady quality of his voice, the absence of anything that reminded her of Thomas. But she had learned not to trust first impressions. Thomas had seemed gentle too in the beginning. "The Hartman Ranch has been empty for 2 years. That is a lot of work for one man." She kept her eyes on the ledger. "It is," Kenneth agreed, "but I prefer it that way." Over the next 30 minutes, Katherine compiled his list: flour, coffee, sugar, salt, beans, dried beef, rope, nails, lamp oil. Kenneth spoke only when necessary, confirming quantities and nodding his understanding. He did not try to make conversation beyond what was required. He did not comment on her appearance or her efficiency or anything else that might sound like kindness but carry hidden meaning. When she tallied the final amount, he counted out the money carefully and added an extra $1. "For the delivery," he said. "I know Murphy's boy usually brings orders out." "That is too much," Katherine said automatically. Kenneth placed the money on the counter and put his hat back on. "Then consider it a thank you for the careful work." He touched the brim of his hat and walked out before she could protest further. Katherine stared at the dollar coin for a long moment, waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to return and demand something in exchange for his generosity. But the door remained closed, and through the window, she watched him mount a roan horse and ride north out of town without looking back. Mr. Murphy emerged from the storeroom, wiping his hands on his apron. "That is the Ortiz fellow I mentioned. Quiet sort. Pays on time, does not cause trouble. His father had a ranch up Colorado way, but Kenneth wanted his own place." "He seems," Katherine paused, searching for a word that did not feel like a judgment she was unqualified to make, "competent." Mr. Murphy chuckled. "That is one way to put it. Heard he is good with horses, real good. The kind of good where animals that nobody else can handle will follow him around like puppies." Katherine returned to her work, but throughout the afternoon, she found herself thinking about Kenneth Ortiz and the way he had stood in the doorway, as though he understood something about not wanting to be cornered. 3 days later, Murphy's son Danny brought back a note with Kenneth's payment for the delivered supplies. The paper had only 3 words written in careful script. "Thank you, K.O." "He did not need to send this," Katherine said, holding the note as though it might bite. Danny shrugged. He was 14 and far more interested in the penny candy on the counter than in the correspondence habits of ranchers. He also sent this. The boy produced a small cloth bag from his pocket. Inside were 3 smooth stones, each about the size of a silver dollar, worn by water until they were almost perfectly round. They were pretty in an understated way, the kind of thing someone might pick up from a creek bed without thinking. Why would he send these? Katherine asked, more to herself than to Danny. He said he found them on his property and thought they were too nice to just sit in the dirt, said you could use them as paperweights if you wanted, or just throw them away if you did not. Danny finally reached for the candy jar. "Can I get my payment now, Mrs. Parker?" Katherine gave him 2 peppermint sticks and set the stones on the corner of her desk. They stayed there as August gave way to September, and she found herself running her thumb over their smooth surfaces when she was thinking, the way other people might worry at her rosary. Kenneth came into town every 2 weeks, always in the afternoon when the store was quiet. He never stayed long, never said more than what was necessary, and never once did he comment on whether Katherine had kept the stones or thrown them away. His orders were always precise, his payments always exact, and Katherine began to anticipate his visits the way she might anticipate a cool breeze on a hot day. Something pleasant precisely, because it demanded nothing from her. In late September, a problem with one of the ranch accounts kept Katherine working past closing time. Mr. Murphy had already left for the day, trusting her to lock up, and the sun was setting when she finally emerged onto the dusty Main Street. The usual bustle had died down to almost nothing, just a few stragglers heading home from the saloon and the distant sound of someone playing a fiddle. She was halfway to her cabin when she heard shouting from the alley beside the butcher shop. Katherine knew she should keep walking, knew that getting involved in other people's troubles was a dangerous luxury she could not afford, but something in the tone of the voice made her pause. "You think you can just show up here and take what is mine?" a man was yelling. Katherine recognized him as Clayton Marsh, a hand who worked for one of the bigger ranches. He was drunk, from the sound of it, and angry. "I am not taking anything." That was Kenneth's voice, still calm, still level. "Mr. Henderson offered me a fair price for the horses, and I accepted. What you were offered is between you and him. You are a liar and a cheat, and I am going to teach you some respect." Katherine heard the sound of a scuffle and made a decision she would probably regret. She walked to the mouth of the alley, her heart pounding against her ribs. Clayton had Kenneth against the wall, or was trying to. Kenneth was not fighting back, just deflecting, moving out of the way of wild swings with an economy of motion that spoke of experience. "Stop it," Katherine said, her voice sharper than she felt. "Stop it right now, or I am fetching the sheriff." Clayton turned, his face red with alcohol and rage. "This is not your concern, Widow Parker. Go home." "Mrs. Parker is right," Kenneth said quietly. "This is done. Go sleep it off, Marsh." Clayton took a step toward Katherine instead, and she felt the old fear rise up in her throat like bile. But before he could close the distance, Kenneth moved between them, not threatening, just present. "Walk away," Kenneth said, and though his voice never rose above a normal speaking tone, something in it made Clayton hesitate. The drunk man spat on the ground and stumbled off, muttering curses under his breath. Kenneth waited until he had rounded the corner before turning to Katherine. "Are you all right?" he asked. Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice. Her hands were shaking and she clasped them together to hide it. Kenneth noticed anyway. "Can I walk you home? You should not be out alone this late." Every instinct she had learned from Thomas screamed at her to refuse, to maintain distance, to never let a man know where she lived or that she was vulnerable. But her cabin was common knowledge in Bisbee, and Kenneth had never given her any reason to fear him. "All right," she heard herself say. They walked in silence through the dusty streets. The evening air had cooled enough to be pleasant, and the sky was turning that particular shade of purple that only seemed to exist in the Arizona desert. Kenneth kept a respectful distance, his hands loose at his sides, not reaching for her or trying to take her arm the way Thomas always had, even when his grip would leave bruises. When they reached her cabin, Kenneth stopped at the gate. "Thank you for intervening back there." "You did not have to do that. You were not fighting back," Katherine said. "That seemed wrong. Fighting only makes things worse most of the time." Kenneth glanced toward the horizon where the last light was fading. Men like Marsh, they are looking for an excuse to be angry. Best not to give it to them. Katherine thought about that, about all the times she had tried not to give Thomas excuses and how it had never mattered anyway. That does not always work. No, Kenneth agreed, his eyes meeting hers for just a moment. Sometimes it does not. He touched his hat and turned to leave, but Katherine found herself speaking before she could think better of it. "Mr. Ortiz," he stopped, looking back. "Thank you for the stones. I use them to hold down invoices when the wind comes through the door." Something that might have been a smile touched the corners of his mouth, so brief she might have imagined it. Then he nodded and walked away into the gathering darkness. October brought cooler weather and an increase in business as ranchers prepared for winter. Katherine saw Kenneth regularly now, sometimes in the store, sometimes just passing on the street. He never pushed for conversation, never asked her personal questions, but he developed a habit of small gestures that spoke louder than words. When she mentioned that one of the store's shutters was loose, it was repaired the next morning. When a group of rowdy cowboys got too loud near the store, Kenneth simply stood nearby until they moved along. When she struggled to load a heavy delivery onto Murphy's wagon, he appeared as though summoned and lifted the crates without comment. These acts of service made Katherine more nervous than any pretty words could have. She did not know how to interpret them, how to guard against them. Thomas had never helped with anything. His cruelty had been overt and easy to recognize once she learned the patterns. This quiet assistance felt like a trap she could not see the mechanism of. One afternoon, when Kenneth came in for supplies, Katherine decided to confront the issue directly. "Mr. Ortiz, why do you do these things?" He had been examining a new shipment of rope, testing the weave between his fingers. He looked up at her, genuinely puzzled. "Which things?" "The shutter. The wagon, the stones before that. You do not have to do any of that." Kenneth set down the rope carefully. "I know I do not have to. I'm not doing them because I expect anything in return if that is what concerns you." "Then why?" Katherine pressed. He was quiet for a long moment, and she watched him search for words with the same careful consideration he brought to everything else. "Because they need doing, and I can do them. And because," he paused, "because you look like someone who has had too many people expect things from you." Thought it might be different if someone just did something without making it into a debt. Katherine felt something twist in her chest, some long buried part of her that wanted to believe him but could not afford to. "I do not need charity." "It is not charity," Kenneth said simply. "It is neighborly. If my fence broke, you would tell me. If I needed extra hands during branding, you would help Murphy spread the word. This is the same thing." "It does not feel the same," Katherine admitted. "I know," Kenneth said, and the understanding in his voice was almost worse than if he had gotten angry. "But that is not your fault." He purchased his supplies, paid, and left, and Katherine stood behind the counter feeling as though something had shifted without her permission. As autumn deepened, Kenneth began bringing things with his supply orders. Not gifts exactly, but offerings presented so casually that Katherine could not quite bring herself to refuse them. A jar of honey from wild bees he had found on his property. 3 books that had belonged to his mother, now dog-eared and well-loved. A carved wooden bird small enough to fit in her palm, something he mentioned making during long evenings when the ranch work was done. "You do not have to keep it," he always said. "Just thought you might like it." Katherine kept everything. She told herself it was because refusing would be rude, would create awkwardness in their business relationship. But the truth was that she was beginning to treasure these small tokens in a way that terrified her. In November, a storm rolled across the desert with unusual ferocity, bringing wind that howled like wounded animals and rain that turned the streets to rivers of mud. Katherine was closing up the store when she realized she had left her shawl, the only good one she owned, hanging on the fence at home that morning to air out. In this wind, it would be torn to shreds or blown into the next territory. She ran through the rain, her skirts heavy with mud, arriving at her cabin to find Kenneth on a ladder, securing the shawl and battening down her shutters against the storm. He was soaked through, his hair plastered to his head, but he worked methodically until everything that could blow away was secured. "What are you doing here?" Katherine shouted over the wind. Kenneth climbed down the ladder and carried it to her small shed. "Saw the storm coming in. Figured you would be working late. Thought I would make sure everything was secure." "You should not have done that. You should not." Katherine struggled to find the words past the confusion and fear and something else she did not want to name. "You need to stop doing things for me." Kenneth stood in the rain, water running down his face, and just looked at her. Not angry, not hurt, just patient. "Why?" Katherine asked, and she was not entirely sure what she was asking anymore. "Because you deserve to be looked after," Kenneth said quietly, "not controlled, not manipulated. Just looked after the way people are supposed to look after each other." "I do not know how to accept that." "I know," Kenneth said. "That is all right." He walked past her to collect his horse from where he had tied it around the side of the cabin, and Katherine watched him prepare to ride back to his ranch in the middle of a dangerous storm, because he had taken the time to protect her property, and she had responded by yelling at him. "Mr. Ortiz, wait." She heard her voice over the wind, sharp with decision. "You cannot ride back in this. The washes will be flooding. You should wait until the worst passes." Kenneth paused, one hand on his saddle. "I do not want to impose. You have been fixing my shutters in a thunderstorm. I think we are past worrying about impositions." Her cabin was small, just 2 rooms, but it was dry and warm. Katherine lit the stove and hung Kenneth's coat near it to dry while he stood awkwardly by the door, water pooling at his feet. "I have coffee," Katherine said. "And some bread from this morning." "Thank you." They sat at her small table, the storm raging outside, and drank coffee in a silence that was surprisingly comfortable. Katherine found herself studying Kenneth's hands where they wrapped around his cup, noting the calluses, the small scars, the steady way he held everything as though it might break if he was not careful. "Can I ask you something?" Katherine said finally. Kenneth nodded. "Why are you not married?" "A man with his own ranch, you must have had offers." "Had a few," Kenneth acknowledged, "but I have never been good with words. My father used to say I was like a stone, hard to read and not much for conversation. Most women want someone who can talk pretty to them." "Words are overrated," Katherine said, and the bitterness in her voice surprised even her. Kenneth's eyes met hers across the table, creek water gray and entirely too perceptive. "Your husband talked pretty, did he?" Katherine's hand jerked, spilling coffee. She reached for a cloth, her heart racing, ready with denials and deflections. But something about the way Kenneth asked, calm and non-judgmental, made the truth rise up in her throat. "He did," she said softly. "He called me beautiful before he hit me. He told me he loved me while he broke my ribs. He said I was precious to him and then locked me in the cellar for 2 days because I spoke to the neighbor." She looked up at Kenneth, defiant now, daring him to pity her. Every kind word he ever spoke was a lie, so yes, words are overrated. Kenneth was very still, the way he got when he was around skittish horses. When he spoke, his voice was careful. "Thank you for telling me that. Not I am sorry, not how terrible, just thank you, acknowledging the trust it took to speak and demanding nothing more." "That is why you flinch," Kenneth continued quietly. "When people say nice things, you are waiting for what comes after. Waiting for it to turn," Katherine agreed. "It always turned with Thomas." "I am not going to hurt you," Kenneth said. Katherine laughed, short and sharp. "That is what he said too." Kenneth absorbed that, nodding slowly. "Then I will not say it. I will just not hurt you, and maybe eventually you will see it for yourself." The storm lasted through the night, and Katherine gave Kenneth a blanket to sleep in the chair by the stove. She lay in her small bed in the next room, listening to the rain and the sound of another person breathing in her space, and realized that for the first time in 3 years, she did not feel afraid. In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world washed clean and smelling of creosote. Kenneth thanked her for the hospitality, checked one more time that her shutters were secure, and rode back to his ranch. He did not mention what she had told him about Thomas, and when he came to the store the following week, he treated her exactly the same as always, competent and courteous and careful not to crowd. But something had changed. Katherine found herself watching for him, noting the days when he usually came to town, feeling disappointed when he did not appear. She started taking more care with her appearance, not in the desperate way she had with Thomas, trying to avoid giving him excuses, but in a way that felt like emerging from a long winter. December arrived with cold nights and bright, brittle days. The miners who worked the copper and silver claims around Bisbee flooded into town with their monthly wages, looking to spend them on drink and entertainment before heading back into the earth. The noise level increased, the danger level increased, and Katherine found herself grateful when Kenneth began timing his visits to coincide with the worst of the crowds. He never said he was there to watch out for her. He would just appear, buying supplies he probably did not need, standing in a position where he could see the whole store, staying until the last drunk cowboy had stumbled out. Then he would touch his hat and leave, and Katherine would lock the door behind him with hands that were not shaking. One evening in mid-December, Katherine was walking home when she saw a horse standing in the middle of the road, a beautiful paint mare with wild eyes and a trailing lead rope. The animal was clearly terrified of something, dancing sideways every time anyone approached, and a small crowd had gathered to watch. "Belongs to Miller," someone said. "Bought her cheap because she is half crazy, broke loose from the stable." "Someone is going to get hurt," another voice added. "Horse like that should be shot before she kills somebody." Katherine was about to move around the crowd when she saw Kenneth approaching from the opposite direction. He took in the situation at a glance, then did something that made the watching crowd murmur in surprise. He sat down in the dirt, right in the middle of the road, close enough for the horse to see him clearly but not close enough to threaten, and then he simply waited. The mare eyed him suspiciously, tossing her head and snorting. Kenneth did not move, did not speak, just sat there with a patience that seemed infinite. Minutes passed. The crowd grew restless, offering suggestions that Kenneth ignored completely, slowly, so slowly Katherine almost did not see it happening. The mare's head began to lower. Her dancing steps became smaller, less panicked. She took one step toward Kenneth, then another, then stopped, waiting for him to lunge or shout or do any of the things men usually did. Kenneth just sat there. Finally, after what felt like an hour but was probably only 15 minutes, the mare walked right up to him and lowered her head to his level. Kenneth raised one hand very slowly and let her smell it. Then he stood just as slowly and gathered up her lead rope. He stroked her neck once, twice, and walked her down the street toward the stable as though they had been friends for years. Katherine watched the whole thing with a feeling in her chest like something breaking open. That night, she could not sleep. She lay in bed thinking about Kenneth sitting in the dirt, about the way he had waited until the horse felt safe enough to approach, about how he had never once tried to force trust that was not freely given. She thought about all the small things he had done over the past 4 months, all the ways he had shown care without asking for anything in return. She thought about the difference between words and actions, between promises and proof. The next morning, Katherine did something she had never done before. She packed a basket with bread, cheese, and a jar of preserves and asked Mr. Murphy if she could have the afternoon off. "You feeling all right, Mrs. Parker?" he asked, surprised. Katherine never took time off. "I need to deliver something to the Ortiz ranch," she said. "It is important." The ride north was longer than she expected, through scrubland dotted with mesquite and prickly pear. She had borrowed Murphy's old horse, a gentle gelding who did not mind her inexperienced handling, and let him follow the well-worn path. Kenneth's ranch was smaller than the big spreads closer to town, but neat and well-maintained. The house was simple adobe, the corals sturdy, and everywhere she looked, she saw signs of hard work and careful planning. Kenneth was at the corral when she arrived, working with a young horse on a lead line, and he looked up in surprise when he saw her. "Mrs. Parker," he said, the question evident in his voice even though he did not speak it. Katherine dismounted, clutching her basket. Now that she was here, she was not entirely sure what she had come to say. "I saw you with the horse yesterday, the paint mare." Kenneth nodded, tying off the lead line and walking over to her. She just needed someone to give her time. She has been beaten too much, taught to fear people, but she is not mean, just scared. "That is what I thought," Katherine said quietly. "That is exactly what I thought." They stood looking at each other, and Katherine felt the weight of 4 months of careful friendship, of trust built in actions rather than words, settling between them like something solid she could finally lean against. "Kenneth," she started, using his first name for the first time. "I need you to understand something. I do not know if I will ever be normal. I do not know if I can be the kind of woman who accepts compliments or believes romantic declarations. Thomas broke something in me, and I am not sure if it can be fixed." Kenneth's expression did not change. He just listened, the way he always did. "But," Katherine continued, "I think I would like to try. With you. If you are willing to be patient with someone who might always flinch at kind words, who might always be waiting for the other shoe to drop." "Katherine," Kenneth said, and his voice was gentle but firm. "I do not need to tell you that I care about you. I think I have been showing you that for months now, but if you need to hear it, I can say it. Or I can just keep proving it day after day, however long it takes for you to believe it. Either way is fine with me." Katherine felt tears burning at the back of her eyes. "I would prefer the showing. I think I need the showing." "Then that is what you will get," Kenneth said simply. He took the basket from her hands and set it on the fence post, then held out his hand, palm up, waiting. Katherine looked at it for a long moment, this offer of connection that demanded nothing, that she could accept or refuse according to her own comfort. Then she placed her hand in his, feeling the warmth and calluses, and the steady, unhurried way his fingers closed around hers. They stood like that until Katherine's borrowed horse shifted, reminding her that she had a long ride back to town. Kenneth helped her mount, his hands steady and impersonal at her waist, and handed up the now empty basket. "Come back whenever you want," he said. "No reason needed. You are always welcome here." Katherine nodded, not trusting her voice, and turned the horse toward home. Over the next weeks, a routine developed. Katherine would ride out to Kenneth's ranch on her afternoons off, usually bringing some excuse of food or supplies. Kenneth never questioned her reasons for coming, just welcomed her and continued whatever work he was doing, letting her join in or simply sit and watch as she preferred. She learned that he was training horses, not just breaking them but really training them, teaching them to trust and respond without fear. She watched him spend hours with a single animal, never raising his voice, never using force, just patient repetition and quiet praise when they got things right. "This one was beaten badly before I got him," Kenneth explained one afternoon, working with a gray gelding who shied at sudden movements. Previous owner thought fear was the way to teach, but fear just makes them unpredictable. You want a horse who chooses to work with you, not one who obeys because he is terrified of what happens if he does not. Katherine understood that he was not just talking about horses. She started staying later, then later still, until it became natural for Kenneth to invite her for supper. He was a simple cook, beans and bacon and coffee, but it tasted better than anything she made for herself in her lonely cabin. They ate in companionable silence most nights, talking only when there was something worth saying. "Tell me about Colorado," Katherine said one evening. "About your family." Kenneth leaned back in his chair, considering. Father had a medium-sized spread, good land, good water. "I have 3 brothers, all of them talkers. They used to joke that I got the share of silence for all 4 of us." "Why did you leave?" "Because it was his ranch, not mine. And because," he paused, choosing words carefully, "because I wanted to build something that was entirely my own. Something I could be proud of without wondering if it was really my father's pride." "Do you miss them?" "Sometimes," Kenneth admitted. "But I write letters and they write back. My mother especially. She understands about needing your own space." Katherine found herself telling him things about her own childhood, about growing up in Tennessee with parents who had died when she was 15, leaving her alone and vulnerable to Thomas's initial charm. She told him about the early days of her marriage, when she had still believed that love could conquer all, that if she just tried hard enough, Thomas would become the man he pretended to be in public. "It was not your fault," Kenneth said when she fell silent. "Nothing you did or did not do could have changed him. That was his choice, his nature." "I know that in my head," Katherine said. "But knowing and believing are different things." "They are," Kenneth agreed. "But you will get there. You are stronger than you think." Christmas came quietly to Bisbee. Kenneth gave Katherine a new shawl, thick wool in a soft gray that he said reminded him of winter skies. Katherine gave him a book of poetry she had ordered from Tucson, because she had noticed him reading during their evenings together and thought he might like it. "Thank you," he said, running his fingers over the cover. Then he opened it and read a few lines silently before looking up at her with something like wonder in his eyes. "This is perfect." They spent Christmas Day at his ranch, cooking a chicken he had bought from a neighbor and making a pie that came out lopsided but tasted fine anyway. It was the best Christmas Katherine had experienced in years, perhaps ever, because it came with no expectations, no performance anxiety, no fear of doing something wrong and paying for it later. As winter progressed into the new year of 1883, Katherine found herself spending more time at Kenneth's ranch than in town. Mr. Murphy, who was older and thinking about retirement, suggested that she might want to consider taking on a partner in the store, someone who could handle things when she was away. "You have been looking happier, Mrs. Parker," he said kindly. "Kenneth Ortiz is a good man. If you are thinking of building a life with him, you should not let this store hold you back." Katherine thought about that conversation for days. She was thinking about it one afternoon in late January when she was helping Kenneth repair a section of fence. The work was hard, physical, and satisfying in a way that store work never was. Kenneth worked beside her without comment, showing her how to set posts and string wire, patient when she made mistakes. "Kenneth," she said, hammering in a nail, "what do you want from life, I mean? What are you working toward?" He straightened, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool winter air. "I want a ranch that can sustain itself and maybe make enough profit to expand a little. I want to be known as someone who trains good horses fairly. He paused, looking at her with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I want someone to build that life with if she is willing. Someone who does not need pretty words, but who understands what it means when I fix her fence and gentle her horses and make sure she has enough firewood for winter." Katherine set down her hammer. "And if that someone still gets frightened sometimes? If she still cannot hear 'I love you' without feeling sick, then I will not say it," Kenneth said steadily. "I will just love her anyway, in all the ways that do not require words." Katherine crossed the distance between them and kissed him. It was not her first kiss, but it was the first one she had chosen freely, without coercion or expectation or fear. Kenneth went very still, letting her control the depth and duration, his hands coming up to rest gently on her arms but not holding, not trapping. When she pulled back, his eyes were dark and warm. "Was that all right?" Katherine asked, suddenly uncertain. "That was more than all right," Kenneth said quietly. "That was everything." They stood in the winter sunshine, surrounded by half-mended fence and patient horses, and Katherine felt something she had thought Thomas had killed in her: hope for the future. That evening, sitting by Kenneth's fire, Katherine made a decision. "I want to tell you how Thomas died." Kenneth had been reading his poetry book, but he set it aside immediately, giving her his full attention. The doctor said consumption, and that was technically true. He had been sick for weeks, getting worse, but he refused to rest, refused to let me call for help until it was too late. And the reason he refused, Katherine took a shaky breath, was because he was convinced I was trying to poison him. Toward the end, he would not eat anything I made, would not drink anything I brought him. He just got sicker and weaker and angrier, blaming me for it all. "The blood on your hands," Kenneth said softly, remembering what she had told him months ago. "You tried to help him at the end." "He grabbed me," Katherine said. "When I tried to give him water, he grabbed my wrist so hard it broke. I screamed and pulled away, and he fell. Hit his head on the bedpost. There was so much blood, and he was already so weak. He died that night, bleeding and cursing me." She looked up at Kenneth, tears streaming down her face. "And I was relieved. God help me, I was relieved." Kenneth moved to sit beside her, not touching but close enough that she could feel his presence. You have been carrying that guilt for 3 years. I do not know if I killed him, or if the consumption did, or if it was some combination. I do not know if that moment of relief makes me a monster." "It makes you human," Kenneth said firmly. "It makes you someone who survived something terrible and came out the other side. Katherine, you do not have to carry that anymore. Whatever happened that night, you did not deserve what came before it, and you did not cause it." Katherine sobbed great gasping cries that she had been holding back since Thomas's funeral. Kenneth sat beside her through all of it, occasionally handing her his handkerchief, but otherwise just present, solid, unwavering. When she finally cried herself out, he asked, "Do you want to stay here tonight? You have your own room, your own space, but you should not be alone right now." Katherine nodded gratefully. Kenneth had been gradually adding a room to his house, and though it was not quite finished, it had a bed and a door that closed. He showed her to it, brought her fresh water and an extra blanket, and said goodnight without any expectation of anything more. Katherine lay in the darkness, exhausted and emptied out, and felt lighter than she had in years. She started staying at the ranch more often after that, always in her own room, always with the freedom to return to town whenever she chose. Kenneth never pushed, never suggested that her presence meant anything beyond what she was ready for it to mean. But slowly, day by day, Katherine began to feel like she belonged there. She learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and hard work, and simple satisfaction of caring for animals. She got better at riding, at mending fence, at all the hundreds of small tasks that kept a place running. Kenneth taught her to gentle horses using his methods, showing her how patience and consistency could overcome even the deepest fear. "You are good at this," he told her one afternoon, watching her work with a young mare who had been skittish when she arrived. "You understand what they need." "I understand what it is like to need time," Katherine corrected. "To need someone to prove they are safe before you can trust them." In March, Kenneth asked her to marry him. They were sitting on his porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in shades of gold and pink when he said, "Katherine, I want you to know that you can stay here as long as you want, with or without marriage. This is your home if you want it to be, no strings attached. But if you are interested, I would like to marry you. Not because I need to own you or control you, but because I want to build a life with you, officially." Katherine's first instinct was to panic, to hear marriage as a trap, a cage, a repeat of everything she had barely survived. But then she looked at Kenneth, really looked at him, at the man who had spent 8 months proving his care through actions, who had never once demanded anything from her, who had taught her that love could be gentle and patient and safe. "Can I think about it?" she asked. "Take all the time you need," Kenneth said. "The offer is not going anywhere." Katherine thought about it for 2 weeks. She rode back to her cabin in town and sat in the space where Thomas had terrorized her, confronting her memories and her fears. She talked to Mr. Murphy, who told her that Kenneth had been asking around about buying the store, not to control Katherine's business, but to make sure she would have it as an asset, something that was entirely hers. She thought about the difference between Thomas's grand promises and Kenneth's quiet consistency. She thought about the fact that in 8 months, Kenneth had never once raised his voice to her, never once made her feel small or stupid or afraid. She thought about the life they could build together, full of horses and hard work and the kind of love that did not need eloquent declarations because it was evident in every action, every choice, every patient moment. At the end of 2 weeks, Katherine rode back to Kenneth's ranch with her answer. He was working in the corral when she arrived, and he looked up with the same expression he always had when he saw her, pleased and calm and utterly without pressure. "Yes," Katherine said before she could lose her nerve. "Yes, I will marry you." Kenneth's whole face transformed with joy, a smile so wide and genuine that it made Katherine's heart ache. He climbed out of the corral and walked over to her, stopping just close enough to take her hands. "I will do everything I can to make you happy," he said. "I will work every day to be worthy of this trust. Just keep being yourself," Katherine said. "That is all I need, just you, exactly as you are." They were married in April, a small ceremony with Mr. Murphy and a few neighbors as witnesses. Kenneth wore his best shirt and hat, and Katherine wore a new dress she had made herself, pale blue like the sky after a storm. The preacher kept the service short, sensing somehow that long speeches were not what either of them wanted. When it came time for Kenneth to kiss his bride, he looked at Katherine first, asking permission with his eyes. She nodded, and he kissed her softly, sweetly, in a way that promised everything without saying a word. The wedding night was difficult. Katherine wanted to be with her husband, wanted to start their marriage fully, but the memories of Thomas were strong. Kenneth understood without her having to explain. They lay together in his, now their, bed, and he held her while she cried and apologized and struggled with the weight of her past. "We have all the time in the world," Kenneth murmured against her hair. "There is no rush. We will take this at whatever pace you need." Over the next weeks, Katherine slowly learned the difference between Thomas's demands and Kenneth's devotion. Kenneth never pushed, never complained, never made her feel inadequate for her fears. When she was ready to try intimacy again, he let her control everything, stopping whenever she asked, checking constantly that she was all right. "You are safe," he told her, over and over, not as empty words but as a promise kept in every gentle touch, every patient pause. "You will always be safe with me." Gradually, painfully, Katherine began to believe him. She began to heal in ways she had not known were possible, discovering that physical love could be tender and reciprocal, something given freely rather than taken by force. Spring turned to summer, and Katherine fell into the rhythm of ranch life fully. She took over the ranch's books, applying her store experience to their accounts and finding ways to save money and increase profits. She continued training horses with Kenneth, developing a reputation in her own right for being able to gentle even the most traumatized animals. "We make a good team," Kenneth said one evening, reviewing the month's earnings. "Better than I ever managed alone." "We do," Katherine agreed, and felt the truth of it settle into her bones. In August, a year after they had first met, a man rode onto their property leading a horse that made Katherine's blood run cold. It was a tall black stallion with the same vicious look in his eye that Thomas had sometimes gotten, and it was clearly dangerous. "Got him cheap at auction," the man explained. "But he is too much for me. Heard you folks can work miracles. Will you take him?" Kenneth looked at the horse, then at Katherine, reading something in her expression that made him nod slowly. "We will try, but it will take time and cost extra." After the man left, Kenneth asked, "Do you want me to handle this one alone?" Katherine shook her head. She had been avoiding thinking about Thomas for months, letting the good days pile up, but she knew that real healing meant confronting her past, not just running from it. "No," she said. "I want to help. I need to prove to myself that something this angry and broken can be saved." They named the stallion Blackthorn, and he lived up to every implication of the name. He bit, kicked, reared, and fought every moment of those first weeks. But Kenneth and Katherine worked with him the same way they worked with all the others: patience, consistency, refusing to meet violence with violence. "He is terrified," Katherine said one afternoon, watching the horse pace in his corral. "Everything he does comes from fear." "Just like everything Thomas did," Kenneth said quietly. Katherine looked at him sharply. "Are you saying I should feel sorry for Thomas?" "No," Kenneth said firmly. "Thomas made choices. This horse did not. But I am saying that hurt creatures often lash out, and recognizing that does not mean you have to forgive them. It just means you understand the source." They worked with Blackthorn for 3 months, longer than they had worked with any other horse. There were days when Katherine wanted to give up, when the horse's rage reminded her too much of her first husband, when she could not separate past from present. On those days, Kenneth would take over completely, never making her feel weak for stepping back. But there were also days when Katherine saw progress, when Blackthorn would accept a touch or take a treat or stand calmly while she brushed him. Those days felt like victories not just for the horse but for herself, proof that time and patience could heal even the deepest wounds. In November, Blackthorn finally allowed Kenneth to mount him. The ride was tense, both horse and rider moving carefully, but it lasted a full 10 minutes with no bucking, no fighting. When Kenneth dismounted, he looked at Katherine with pride shining in his eyes. "You helped do that," he said. "You helped save him. 2 weeks later, Katherine rode Blackthorn herself. The horse that had come to them broken and violent walked gently under her guidance, responsive and calm. Katherine cried while she rode, tears streaming down her face, because she finally understood that if this angry, damaged creature could learn to trust again, then so could she. That night, she told Kenneth, "I love you." The words felt strange in her mouth, dangerous, like a weapon she was handing him that he could use to destroy her. But Kenneth just smiled, that rare, brilliant smile that transformed his whole face. "I know," he said simply. "You have been showing me for months." "No," Katherine insisted, needing him to understand. "I am saying the words. I know you have never needed them, but I need to say them. I love you, Kenneth, I love you, and I am not afraid of saying it anymore." Kenneth pulled her close, holding her with the same gentle strength he brought to everything. "Then I will say them back. I love you, Katherine. I loved you when you were too scared to hear it, and I love you now that you can. I will love you for the rest of my life, and I will show you every single day." And he did. The years that followed were not without challenges. Katherine still had hard days when old memories resurfaced, when a stranger's angry voice or a sudden movement made her flinch. But Kenneth was always there, steady and patient, reminding her through his actions that she was safe, that she was valued, that she was loved in ways that had nothing to do with pretty lies and everything to do with truth. Their ranch grew. They bought more land, built a larger house, acquired a reputation as the best horse trainers in the territory. People came from as far as Tucson and Tombstone bringing their most difficult animals, knowing that Kenneth and Katherine Ortiz had a special gift for healing broken spirits. In the spring of 1885, Katherine discovered she was pregnant. The news filled her with equal parts joy and terror. She had never imagined herself as a mother, had never thought she would trust anyone enough to build a family with them. "What if I am not good at this?" She asked Kenneth one night, her hands on her still flat stomach. "What if I do not know how to be a mother?" "Then we will figure it out together," Kenneth said, covering her hands with his. "The same way we figure out everything else, with patience and trial and error and a lot of love." Their son was born in December, a healthy baby with Kenneth's gray eyes and Katherine's stubborn chin. They named him Samuel, after Katherine's father, and discovered that sleepless nights and constant worry could somehow also be the most fulfilling experience of their lives. Kenneth was a natural father, patient and gentle with the baby the same way he was with horses and with Katherine. He changed diapers without complaint, walked the floor during midnight crying sessions, and looked at his son with such obvious wonder that it made Katherine fall in love with him all over again. "You are good at this," she told him one afternoon, watching him rock Samuel to sleep. "I have a good teacher," Kenneth said, nodding at her. "I do not know what I am doing either." "Exactly. We are learning together. That is what makes it work." When Samuel was 6 months old, Katherine surprised herself by suggesting they might want more children. "I always thought one would be enough if I had any at all. But watching you with him, seeing how much love there is in this house, I think there is room for more." Kenneth's answer was to kiss her thoroughly and say, "Whatever you want, Katherine, always whatever you want." Their daughter Emma was born in 1887, followed by another son, Daniel, in 1889. The ranch house echoed with children's laughter, with the sounds of a family being built on foundations of trust and respect. Katherine marveled at how different this life was from anything she had imagined possible during those dark years with Thomas. She taught her children to be kind, to keep their word, to understand that love was something you did, not just something you said. Kenneth taught them patience, how to read animals and people, how to be strong without being cruel. "Do you ever think about Thomas?" Kenneth asked her one night when the children were finally asleep. It was 1890, 8 years since they had married, and they were sitting on their porch watching the stars. "Sometimes," Katherine admitted, "but not with fear anymore. Mostly I think about how glad I am that I survived him, that I did not let him destroy my capacity for happiness." "You are the strongest person I know," Kenneth said. "I am not, though. I am still afraid of things. I still have scars." "Being strong does not mean having no fear or scars," Kenneth said. "It means surviving anyway. It means building something beautiful out of the wreckage." Katherine leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of his shoulder, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. Thank you for showing me that love could be different. Thank you for being patient when I could not hear your words. Thank you for proving it with actions until I could believe. Thank you for trusting me anyway, Kenneth replied. For taking a chance on someone who is not good with pretty speeches, for seeing past my silence to what I was really saying. They sat together as the night deepened, comfortable in the silence that had defined their relationship from the beginning, a silence that spoke of understanding and respect, and a love that needed no words to make it real. In the spring of 1891, Mr. Murphy finally retired, and Kenneth and Katherine bought his store outright. They kept Katherine's maiden name on the deed, making it legally and irrevocably hers, a gesture that made her cry with gratitude even though Kenneth just shrugged and said it made sense since she was the one who knew how to run it. They hired a young woman to manage the day-to-day operations, but Katherine still went into town regularly, enjoying the balance between ranch life and business. She had proven to herself that she could do both, could be both a rancher's wife and a businesswoman, could build multiple kinds of success without losing herself in the process. Their children grew. Samuel showed his father's gift with horses, spending hours in the corrals learning to gentle and train. Emma inherited Katherine's head for numbers and love of books, and Daniel seemed to have gotten the best of both his parents, equally comfortable with animals and people. We did good, Katherine said one afternoon, watching the children play while she and Kenneth worked on mending tack. We did, Kenneth agreed. I never thought I would have this, Katherine continued. A family, a home, a partner who actually feels like a partner. There were days when I thought Thomas had killed that possibility forever. Kenneth set down the bridle he had been working on and looked at her seriously. Thomas tried to kill a lot of things in you, but he did not succeed. You survived him, Katherine. You survived and you healed and you built something amazing. That is all you, not me. It is both of us, Katherine corrected. I could not have healed without you showing me what real love looked like. And I could not have built this life without you choosing to trust me, even when every instinct told you not to. We are a team. We always have been. In 1893, when Katherine was 30 years old and Kenneth 32, they celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary. The ranch was prosperous, their children were healthy, and Katherine could honestly say she was happy, truly and completely happy in a way she had never imagined possible. They threw a party, inviting neighbors and friends, the ranch hands and townspeople who had become their community. There was food and music and dancing, and Katherine found herself laughing in Kenneth's arms as he spun her around their yard. Are you happy? He asked, though he could clearly see the answer on her face. So happy, Katherine confirmed. Happy enough that it still scares me sometimes, like it might be taken away. It will not be, Kenneth said firmly. We have built this together on solid ground. There is no storm that can take it away, not as long as we face it together. Late that night, after the guests had gone home and the children were in bed, Katherine and Kenneth sat on their porch as they had so many times before. The desert stretched out around them, vast and beautiful under the stars, full of possibility. I want to tell you something, Katherine said. And I need you to really hear it. Kenneth turned to face her fully, giving her his complete attention the way he always did. I love you, Katherine said. I love you in ways I did not know were possible. I love the way you fix things without being asked, the way you gentle horses with patience instead of force, the way you father our children with kindness and consistency. I love that you taught me that love does not have to hurt, that kind words can actually be true. I love that you never needed me to say any of this because you already knew it from my actions, the same way I have always known how you felt from yours. Kenneth's eyes were bright in the starlight, emotional in a way he rarely allowed himself to be. Katherine, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. You and our children and this life we have built. I know I am not good with words like this, but I need you to know that every single day, I wake up grateful that you took a chance on a quiet cowboy who did not know how to speak but knew how to show. You speak just fine, Katherine said, reaching for his hand. You have been speaking to me since the day we met, in every action, every choice, every moment of patience. You speak fluently in the language that matters most. They kissed, a kiss that held 10 years of trust and healing and love, a kiss that promised decades more of the same. The years continued to pass, marked by the growth of their children and their ranch. Samuel eventually took over most of the horse training, working alongside his father with the same quiet competence. Emma divided her time between the store and helping her mother with the ranch accounts, showing a head for business that promised future success. Daniel, the youngest, proved to be gifted at bringing new clients to the ranch, his easy charm attracting business in a way his more introverted family members could not. Kenneth and Katherine grew older together, their hair graying, their faces weathering like the desert landscape around them. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened, every year adding another layer of trust, another proof that the foundation they had built was unshakable. They still communicated primarily through actions rather than words. Kenneth still fixed things before Katherine noticed they were broken, still left small gifts that said, "I am thinking of you," without demanding recognition. Katherine still showed her love through the 100 daily tasks of partnership, through her support of his work and her care for their shared life. But now, when the words came, they were no longer frightening. Katherine could say, "I love you," without waiting for pain to follow. Kenneth could say, "You are beautiful," without Katherine flinching away. They had proven to each other over decades that words could be true, that kindness did not have to be a trap, that love spoken aloud could match love demonstrated through action. In 1905, when Katherine was 42 and Kenneth 44, they became grandparents for the first time. Samuel and his wife had a daughter they named Katherine, and watching Kenneth hold his tiny namesake with the same gentle care he had shown their own children, Katherine felt her heart overflow with gratitude for the life they had built. "I never thought I would have this," she told Kenneth that night. "Children, grandchildren, a love that lasted. Thomas tried to convince me I was worthless, that no one would ever really care about me, and now look at all of this. Look at what we made." "Thomas was wrong about everything," Kenneth said simply. "You are valuable and loved and have always deserved gentleness. I'm just grateful I got to be the one to show you that." They sat on their porch, the same porch where they had sat for decades, holding hands and watching the desert night. Their bodies were older now, marked by time and hard work, but their connection was as strong as ever. "Do you remember the day we met?" Katherine asked. "You came into the store and ordered supplies and never said an unnecessary word." "I remember thinking you looked like you needed space," Kenneth said, "like someone who had been crowded too much and needed room to breathe. You saw that right away. You have always been easy to read, for me at least, I think because I watch what people do more than what they say. And everything about the way you moved, the way you held yourself, said you needed gentleness and distance and time. And you gave me all of that," Katherine said. "You gave me everything I needed, even when I did not know how to ask for it." "We gave each other what we needed," Kenneth corrected. "You taught me that my way of loving was enough, that not everyone needs poetry and grand declarations. You made me feel valuable for who I was, not for who I could pretend to be." They fell into comfortable silence, the kind of silence that had defined their relationship from the beginning, a silence full of communication and understanding and love that needed no translation. As the years passed into the early 1910s, Kenneth and Katherine began gradually turning over more of the ranch operations to their children. They remained active and involved, but allowed the next generation to take leadership, to make their own decisions and build on the foundation their parents had established. "We did good work here," Katherine said one afternoon in 1912, watching Samuel work with a nervous mare, using all the techniques Kenneth had taught him. "Not just the ranch, but the family. We broke the cycle. Our children will never know what it is like to fear the people who are supposed to love them." "That is your victory most of all," Kenneth said. "You could have let Thomas's cruelty define you, could have become bitter and closed off. Instead, you chose to heal, to build something better. That takes more courage than anything I have ever done." "We did it together," Katherine insisted. "I could not have healed without you showing me what was possible." In 1915, as the world beyond their Arizona ranch began to shift toward war and change, Kenneth and Katherine celebrated their 32nd wedding anniversary. They were in their 50s now, grandparents multiple times over, respected elders in the Bisbee community. They held a quiet celebration, just the two of them, riding out to a spot on their property that overlooked the valley. The desert spread out below them, unchanged despite all the years that had passed, constant and beautiful in its harsh way. 32 years, Katherine marveled. It feels like both forever and no time at all. I know what you mean, Kenneth said. I can barely remember life before you, but I also feel like we just got started. Do you have any regrets? Katherine asked. Anything you wish had been different? Kenneth considered the question seriously, as he considered everything. I wish you had never had to suffer what you did with Thomas. I wish I could have found you sooner, saved you from those years, but I cannot regret anything about our life together. Every moment has been exactly what I wanted. Even the hard parts, Katherine challenged. The times I could not let you touch me. The nights I woke up screaming. The years it took me to learn to trust, especially those parts, Kenneth said firmly, because those parts were when you showed me who you really are. Someone strong enough to survive hell and gentle enough to help heal broken horses. Someone brave enough to try again after every reason not to. I fell in love with all of you, Katherine, not just the easy parts. Katherine felt tears on her cheeks, good tears, the kind that came from being truly seen and loved. I spent so long thinking I was broken beyond repair. You showed me I was just wounded and wounds can heal. You showed me that love does not need flowery words, Kenneth replied. That the truest affection is demonstrated through consistent action, through showing up day after day and choosing your partner over and over again. They sat together as the sun began to set, painting the sky in colors that never grew old no matter how many times they watched. Their hands were clasped, aged and weathered and strong, a perfect symbol of their relationship, enduring, genuine, unbreakable. Tell me again, Katherine said softly. In words, I know you show me every day, but sometimes I still need to hear it. Kenneth turned to face her, his gray eyes serious and full of love. Katherine Ortiz, you are the love of my life. You are my partner, my best friend, the mother of my children, the reason I wake up grateful every single morning. I love you more now than I did when we married, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today. You taught me that love can be quiet and still be powerful, that it can be demonstrated instead of declared. But I am glad I can also tell you that you have healed enough to hear these words without fear. I love you, Katherine. I will always love you. Katherine leaned against him, feeling safe and cherished and entirely whole. I love you too, Kenneth. Thank you for teaching me that love could be kind. Thank you for proving it every single day for 32 years. Thank you for being patient when I needed patience, gentle when I needed gentleness, and strong when I needed strength. Thank you for being exactly who you are. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Kenneth and Katherine Ortiz sat together in the peaceful silence they had mastered decades ago. A silence that spoke more eloquently than any words could of a love built on trust, demonstrated through action, and proven through time. Their story was not one of grand romantic gestures or poetic declarations. It was a story of consistent kindness, of patience rewarded, of wounds slowly healing through the medicine of genuine care. It was the story of a woman who learned that kind words did not have to be weapons, and a cowboy who proved that love could be shown without speaking. And it was a story that would continue, through their children and grandchildren, through the ranch they had built together, through the countless small acts of love that made up a life truly lived. A story that proved, beyond any doubt, that the quietest love could also be the deepest, that actions spoke louder than words, and that healing was always possible when two people committed to walking the path together, one patient step at a time. The desert wind blew softly across the land they had worked and loved and made their own, carrying with it the promise of more years to come, more sunsets to watch, more quiet moments of perfect understanding. Katherine and Kenneth Ortiz had built something rare and precious, a love that needed no translation, a partnership built on truth rather than pretty lies, A happily ever after earned through decades of choosing each other, day after day, in ways both silent and profound.